The state banquet had been planned down to the final second, but no protocol could prepare the palace for what Princess Kate saw across the room. On Camilla's hand rested a ruby ring unmistakably connected to Diana. Kate froze, studied it once more, and then made a decision no guest expected. Before the first formal toast could begin, she ordered the banquet halted, turning a glittering royal evening into a moment of stunned silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Buckingham Palace fell silent. A state banquet, the Crown's formal dinner for honored foreign guests and officials, was designed to display order and unity. Diplomats waited with raised glasses. Every detail had been approved. Kate understood that pressure. Beside William, she carried the expectation that the future monarchy would remain disciplined and calm. Kate lowered her untouched glass, leaned toward a senior aide, and spoke without raising her voice. Nothing continues until that ring is explained. The aide moved toward the master of the household, the official responsible for major royal ceremonies. He stopped the opening toast before Charles could begin. Whispers vanished. The Princess of Wales had not requested a private pause. She had publicly stopped the banquet. Camilla reacted before she could hide her fear. She covered the ruby with her opposite hand, but the gesture drew more attention to it. Confidence left her face. The Queen Consort knew Kate had recognized the jewel, and she knew why that mattered. Diana's memory still shaped William's grief, the public's trust, and the meaning of the role his wife now held. William turned toward Kate in confusion, then followed her gaze. His expression tightened. The ring was not simply old jewelry. It was tied to his mother, her pain, and a chapter the palace had never settled. He said nothing, yet his hand gripped his chair as anger fought. A palace official checked the approved jewelry schedule twice. Camilla's ruby ring was not listed. Major pieces worn at state occasions were recorded for security and historical purposes, meaning the jewel had been hidden from the schedule or introduced after final approval. Someone had crossed a line before the first guest arrived. Charles rose slowly. The king looked at Kate, then at his wife, and finally at the ring she could no longer conceal. The monarchy's grandest ceremony had stopped because the past had entered the room uninvited. But the ring was only the object at the center of the crisis. The real danger lay in the memories, loyalties, and private wounds now staring back at one another. To the gathered guests, it was a beautiful ruby set beneath palace lights. To Kate, it represented a boundary that should never have been crossed. To Camilla, it carried a far more complicated meaning, one tied to status, survival, and years spent living beneath another woman's memory. And to William, the sight of the ring opened a wound he had learned to conceal, but had never truly escaped. Kate remained still, but her mind returned to a private conversation with William months earlier. He had spoken quietly about his mother's jewelry, explaining that some pieces were more than royal property. The Princess of Wales, the title held by the wife of the direct heir, understood that her role carried Diana's shadow as well as its honor. Every choice she made was compared with the woman who came before her, and every silence risked being mistaken for surrender. William gripped the back of his chair until his fingers tightened. The future king had been trained to control every reaction, especially before diplomats and senior officials. Yet the ring was not an abstract symbol to him. It belonged to memories of grief, public loss, and a mother whose possessions had too often been treated as palace assets rather than pieces of a broken family. Camilla leaned toward Charles and spoke in a low, urgent voice. She insisted she had not taken the ring and had never entered a private collection without approval. The Queen Consort said a palace curator had presented it as formally released from a sealed royal collection, a protected store of historically sensitive objects kept away from ordinary ceremonial use. She had believed the decision was legitimate. Now she could feel the room judging her before the facts were known. Kate's anger ran deeper than ownership. She remembered the documented account attached to the jewel, which connected it to one of Diana's most painful final royal appearances, when private sorrow had been hidden beneath public duty. Wearing it at a state celebration did not simply revive history, it turned suffering into decoration. Anne watched each face carefully. The Princess Royal, the sovereign's sister, and one of the family's most experienced working members, recognized the true conflict before anyone spoke it aloud. This was not a fight over a ring. It was a question of whether royal authority could erase private grief, simply because the crown controlled the object. Charles looked from his wife to his son, and understood the danger. If Camilla had been officially authorized, someone had made a decision, with enormous emotional consequences. If she had not, then someone inside the household had manipulated them all. A senior aide finally returned carrying a restricted jewelry record. The page had been altered only days before the banquet, and the change required access to the sovereign's private household. As the family stared at the new entry, attention shifted away from the ruby itself and toward the hidden hand that had placed it on Camilla's finger. The crisis had not begun beneath the chandeliers of the banquet hall. It had started 6 days earlier in a locked dressing room, during a private jewelry fitting that was never entered into the official schedule. Only Camilla, her dresser, and a palace curator were present. A velvet case was opened, a ruby flashed beneath the lamp, and one warning was quietly ignored. A warning that would later bring the entire royal household to a standstill. Camilla entered the room, expecting a routine final selection for the state banquet. Royal jewelry chosen for such occasions normally passed through security checks, historical review, and written approval before it could be worn. Those steps mattered, because every jewel carried both financial value and political meaning. A single unauthorized piece could suggest hidden favor, private rivalry, or a direct challenge to the family's internal order. Edmund Vale placed a sealed case on the table and opened it with deliberate care. The palace curator, an official responsible for safeguarding and documenting royal objects, lifted out Diana's ruby ring and described it as a symbol of full royal continuity. He knew the phrase would appeal to a woman who had spent years fighting to be accepted. Camilla stared at the jewel, then immediately shook her head. Her dresser stepped closer and spoke before the silence could harden. The Prince of Wales has never approved this piece for public use. She knew the ring had remained inside a restricted collection because of its emotional connection to William, Harry, and their mother. That protection mattered. The object belonged to palace records, but the grief attached to it belonged to 2 sons. Vale did not retreat. He produced a newly signed release note and told Camilla that Charles had authorized the ring's return to ceremonial use. The Queen Consort hesitated, asking twice whether the king understood exactly which piece had been selected. When the curator answered yes, she finally allowed the ring onto her finger. Yet her discomfort remained. She looked down at it as though it carried a warning she could already feel. Kate learned of the fitting by accident. Her aide received a misdirected inventory amendment listing Diana's ruby ring among Camilla's banquet accessories. The document should never have reached her office, but once it did, the future queen could not ignore it. She read the entry again, then asked why William's consent was missing. Kate confronted Vale privately the next morning. He refused to explain the change and insisted the decision came from the highest level. She pressed him once more, but he simply tapped the release note and ended the conversation. One detail remained impossible to dismiss. Charles's authority mark appeared at the bottom, but his handwritten signature did not. That forged appearance of royal approval now followed the family into the banquet hall, where Kate and Camilla could no longer avoid facing each other. When the guests were escorted into adjoining rooms, Kate refused to leave. She remained beside the long banquet table, while candles burned over untouched plates and abandoned glasses. Camilla stood opposite her, the ruby still visible on her hand. No crowd could soften what came next. No aide could interrupt it. For the first time, The future queen and the reigning queen confronted the meaning of Diana without ceremony standing between them. Kate walked slowly around the table and stopped several feet away. She did not raise her voice. "Who told you that you had the right to wear it?" The question landed harder than any public accusation because it stripped away rank, ceremony, and protection. A state banquet was meant to show unity before foreign guests, so stopping it had already exposed a fracture the palace could not easily hide. Camilla's anger rose at once. She said the ring had been formally approved, and that she would not accept being humiliated over a decision she believed had been settled. The queen consort insisted she had followed palace procedure, meaning the official chain of checks used to approve royal objects for public use. She had trusted the document. Now she felt cornered by a family wound she had spent decades trying to survive. Kate refused to attack her marriage or her place beside Charles. She kept the argument where it belonged. William had seen his mother's ring displayed at a celebration, as if grief could be turned into ceremony, and that pain mattered more than appearances. The future queen told Camilla that possession could be explained, but emotional judgment could not be delegated to a curator. Camilla pulled the ring halfway from her finger, then stopped. Removing it would look like confession. Keeping it on felt like defiance. Her hand trembled before she lowered it. Then she admitted the truth. She had been warned that refusing the jewel would prove she could never fully embody the role of queen. William stepped forward before Kate could answer. He told Camilla that authorization might explain how the ring reached her hand, but it could not erase memory, respect, or responsibility. The prince spoke with controlled force, yet the anger of a son remained beneath every word. She looked at him and finally understood that the wound was not symbolic, it was personal. Charles entered without aids and immediately sensed the damage. Camilla told him the release had been issued under his authority. The king asked for the document, read it once, and went still. He recognized the approval mark at once. It had been copied from a confidential household directive, a private order meant for internal royal business. The confrontation had exposed the family's pain, but the false approval revealed something even more dangerous, a hidden use of the king's authority. Charles held the release note beneath a reading lamp while the others waited. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone. Instead, he placed one finger over the approval mark and stared at it with the stillness of a man realizing that his authority had been turned into a weapon. The banquet crisis was no longer a private quarrel over Diana. Someone inside the palace had manipulated the crown itself. The king understood how serious that was. Only a small circle of senior household officials could access the sovereign's approval marks, restricted jewelry records, and state banquet files. The sovereign's office was the private administrative structure that carried out the monarch's formal decisions. Charles held the power, but that power depended on trusted aides using it honestly. One false mark could turn his authority into permission he had never given. Charles sat alone for several minutes after the others stepped back. He removed his glasses, pressed his fingers against his eyes, and finally admitted to Anne that he could not remember approving any request involving Diana's ring. The monarch sounded less like a ruler than a man who feared his own name had been used to wound his family. Anne took the document and studied it line by line. She noticed the date format matched internal curator records, not papers issued directly from the sovereign's office. The Princess Royal explained that the difference mattered because official royal directives followed a fixed pattern. Someone had copied the authority mark but built the rest of the document from the wrong system. Kate remained composed, though the pressure around her had become almost unbearable. She told Charles she had not halted the banquet to challenge him. She had stopped it, because continuing would have forced the family to accept a lie in front of the world. The future queen knew silence would protect the ceremony, but it would destroy trust between father, son, and wife. Anne then produced a documented proposal Edmund Vale had submitted weeks earlier. The curator wanted to create an exhibition presenting Camilla as the final inheritor of Diana's royal symbolism. He had argued that the monarchy needed one image powerful enough to close the past and establish a new line of continuity. Charles understood the motive immediately. By placing the ruby ring on Camilla during a globally watched state banquet, Vale intended to create an image that could never be taken back. Once photographed, it would suggest that Diana's place had been ceremonially transferred without William's consent. The king ordered security to locate the curator at once. Moments later, an officer returned with worse news. Vale had already left the palace carrying a locked archive case. The forged release had identified the hand behind the crisis, but the missing curator ensured that the consequences would spread far beyond the interrupted banquet. Within minutes, doors were locked, staff movements were restricted, and the palace shifted from celebration to containment. Diplomats waited without explanation, while senior courtiers whispered into secure telephones. Yet the most painful consequence unfolded in silence. Camilla sat alone in a private drawing room, the ruby ring resting on a table before her, realizing that she had become both the face of the scandal and a pawn in someone else's design. The banquet was postponed at once. Guests were informed that a serious internal security matter had forced the formal program to be suspended. That program was the approved order of speeches, toasts, and ceremonial duties planned for the evening. The delay mattered because a state banquet was built to project stability. Every extra minute of silence invited suspicion, and every closed door suggested that the crown had lost control inside its own home. Camilla removed the ring with shaking fingers and wrapped it inside a plain handkerchief. When her dresser offered to return it to the velvet case, she pushed it away. The queen consort could no longer bear to look at it. She had worn the ruby believing it might end years of comparison with Diana. Instead, it had deepened the very wounds she wanted to escape. Charles entered quietly and found his wife staring at the covered jewel. Camilla told him she had wanted one evening in which she was not measured against the woman who came before her. The king listened without interrupting. Her sadness did not erase the harm, but it exposed how easily fear had been used against her. William responded with colder resolve. He requested that every piece directly linked to his mother be temporarily sealed until ownership, consent, and historical records could be reviewed. A restricted seal meant no object could be moved, displayed, or worn without fresh written authority. The prince knew this was not merely about jewelry. It was about preventing private grief from being controlled by palace officials again. Security officers soon recovered the missing archive case inside a service vehicle near the palace gates. Edmund Vale was gone. The curator had vanished beyond the grounds, leaving behind photographs, fitting notes, and a prepared press statement. Kate opened the document and felt her anger sharpen. It described Camilla wearing the ruby ring as the completion of royal succession, as though Diana's memory could be transferred through a single public image. Then she found something worse. A handwritten note lay beneath the papers, addressed to her personally. It warned that stopping the banquet would force William to choose between his wife and his father. The threat had been designed to divide the future king from the present sovereign. Instead, it pushed Kate and Charles toward a private decision no official could make for them. Long after the guests had departed, Kate and Charles entered a small private room with no secretaries, no security officers, and no ceremonial distance. The king closed the door himself. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Kate placed the threatening note between them and told him she would accept blame for halting the banquet, but she would not allow William to be forced into choosing between his father and his mother's memory. Charles sat across from her, without prepared statements or advisors to shape his words. The closed room stripped away the protection of rank. A private audience, meaning a direct meeting with the sovereign, without the wider household present, usually preserved control. This one demanded truth. Kate explained that she had acted after watching William's face change when he saw the ring. She had not wanted to humiliate Camilla or challenge the monarch. She had wanted to stop a wound from being turned into ceremony. The king looked down at the note and admitted what he had avoided for years. He had believed silence was the safest way to manage Diana's legacy. Silence prevented public arguments, protected official appearances, and allowed the family to keep moving. But it had also created an empty space where others could rewrite memory and use old pain for their own purpose. Charles spoke with visible regret. Protecting the monarchy, he told Kate, could not mean demanding that his sons erase the emotional truth of their childhood. William had lost a mother before he was old enough to understand the machinery surrounding him. The future king had carried that grief beneath duty ever since. No document, title, or royal collection could cancel it. Kate offered a solution without triumph. The ring would return to a protected family collection. The unauthorized release would be formally recorded, and Camilla would be allowed to speak honestly about how she had been pressured. A protected collection meant the jewel would remain secured as family property, rather than being available for ordinary ceremonial use. That distinction mattered because it placed human consent above institutional possession. The king agreed to something even stronger. From that night forward, no deeply personal item associated with Diana could be worn publicly without William's written approval. The new protocol would turn respect into a binding rule rather than a private expectation. Charles then opened the door and invited Camilla inside. She faced Kate without anger and admitted, in a recorded private conversation kept for the household account, that she should never have worn the ring despite the pressure placed upon her. Kate reached across and took her hand. It was not complete forgiveness. It was recognition. Both women had been pushed into a symbolic battle designed by someone else. The family had finally chosen honesty inside the palace. But by morning, the halted banquet had become a global story, demanding an answer from the crown. By sunrise, the banquet's silence had become the loudest royal story in the world. Cameras gathered outside Buckingham Palace, broadcasters interrupted regular programs, and every front page carried the same image: Kate standing rigid beside the banquet table, while Camilla's ruby-covered hand rested beneath the light. The public did not see the forged approval or the private reconciliation. They saw Diana's memory collide with the modern crown. Buckingham Palace issued a brief statement before breakfast. It confirmed that the banquet had been suspended because of an unauthorized breach involving a protected item from the royal collection. That collection meant the secured group of jewels, letters, and objects held for the monarch and the wider royal family. The careful wording mattered because it transformed what looked like personal jealousy into a possible abuse of royal authority. The media divided almost instantly. Some commentators praised Kate as the woman who had defended Diana's dignity when palace protocol failed. Others described Camilla as a queen trapped inside a history she could neither escape nor repair. Each argument carried danger. One turned the future monarch's wife into a rebel. The other reduced the reigning royal consort to a permanent symbol of blame. The London Chronicle captured the national mood in one brutal image. Its front page showed the ruby ring in extreme close-up beneath 3 words: Kate said stop. Copies vanished from newsstands within hours. At the gates of Kensington Palace, a crowd formed beneath the morning rain. One woman placed a single red rose below a photograph of Diana, touched the frame once, and walked away without speaking. A broadcaster read the palace statement live and paused when he reached the phrase, unauthorized use of sovereign approval. Sovereign approval meant permission issued in the monarch's name. Those words revealed that the crisis was no longer only about grief, rivalry, or jewelry. Someone had used the king's power without consent, and the public understood the threat immediately. William appeared before cameras later that morning. He refused to condemn Camilla, despite the pressure surrounding him. The prince said through a recorded palace statement that his mother's memory must never be used to divide the family she left behind. His restraint changed the story. Anger gave way to something more difficult: accountability without revenge. Police found Edmund Vale hours later as he attempted to deliver copies of the prepared succession statement to an international magazine. The curator was detained, and the documents were seized before publication. Charles then approved the palace's final announcement. He, Kate, William, and Camilla would appear together before the rescheduled banquet. The family now had to turn private reconciliation into public unity. The monarchy could no longer hide behind silence. It had to show the world what had been protected, what had been forgiven, and what would never be repeated. 3 nights later, the state banquet resumed, but the royal family returned changed. Camilla wore no ruby. Kate entered beside William with calm determination, while Charles carried the weight of a decision that reached beyond one evening. The ring had been removed from public view, the forged authority had been exposed, and the family now understood the truth. Diana's memory could not be inherited through jewelry, controlled through paperwork, or erased through silence. Charles rose before the first toast and addressed the guests directly. He acknowledged that the previous banquet had been halted to protect the integrity of the crown. That phrase meant preserving the honesty, authority, and public trust on which the monarchy depended. The king did not hide behind ceremony. He made it clear that continuing the event under false authority would have damaged the institution more deeply than stopping it ever could. Camilla had already returned the ring in private. Before entering the banquet hall, she closed the velvet case herself and placed it in William's hands. "It belongs with the memory you choose to protect," she told him. The queen consort did not ask for forgiveness, and she did not defend the pressure that had led her to wear it. She simply accepted that some symbols carried pain no title could overcome. William took the case without triumph. The prince understood that accountability had finally replaced years of avoidance, but victory felt too simple for what had happened. His mother's ruby ring would now enter a sealed family collection under the joint guardianship of him and Harry. That arrangement meant neither palace officials nor future royal households could use it ceremonially, without the brothers' direct consent. Kate watched the exchange with quiet relief. Her stand had not been about defeating Camilla or publicly claiming Diana's legacy as her own. It had proved that compassion and firmness could exist together when tradition crossed a human boundary. The future queen had protected William's grief while leaving room for another woman to admit a painful mistake. Charles then approved a permanent royal protocol. Personal objects connected to family trauma could no longer be absorbed into ceremonial property simply because the institution possessed them. Edmund Vale was dismissed, stripped of all archive access, and prosecuted for falsifying sovereign authorization and removing restricted records. The banquet finally continued, but the monarchy's most meaningful act had already taken place. Kate had stood still, said no, and forced the crown to choose dignity over appearances. Her decision did not weaken the institution. It proved that survival required moral limits, honest memory, and the courage to stop when continuing would become an act of betrayal. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.